Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of American Scouser TV's Fantasy Premier League show. Been a couple weeks since we were together. We had a couple solo shows, but we are here. 10 match weeks left. We navigated a very gruesome blank match week 29. We will talk about the announcements that occurred with the double game week 34, some speculation around double game week 35 or 36, and then, of course, the big double game week 37 that we're all going to expect to see. But before we do that, we'll welcome in my co-host. How are we doing, my friend?
Doing well. Glad to be back on the show here with you and not have to do it solo and bore the audience to death by myself.
Well, we'll bore them together. And as always, if you are watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, wherever you are, feel free, if you can, leave comments, ask questions. We'll bring them up on screen and we'll review them as the program goes on. As we always do, we will start by quickly looking at the fallout from the low-scoring match week 29 as far as the American Scouser Cup goes. Not a lot of movement. Johnny Mac Reds is still sitting on top, just outside of the top 10,000. Very respectable score. Alice in Wonderland, unused substitute, hanging around there in the top 25 or 26,000. We have a little bit of our American Scouser crew showing up on the front page. My wife, Kelly, of course, ahead of me in sixth place, but is falling on a red arrow. Scott Fish, who has been Fishkin, who's been part of our Thursday night podcast in the past and a fill-in at times, helps us out as a contributor, is currently in ninth. And, well, just look at that. Yours truly has slid himself into the top 10 of the American Scouser Cup. Better late than never.
I like how most weeks when we show this, the snapshot ends at like 6 or 7, maybe 8. But
I have no idea what you're talking about. But when you create the graphics, you are allowed to space the graphics.
Fair play.
But we'll talk more about our teams a little later in the program. But as we usually do, let's take a look at that week. It is crazy to me to think you couldn't have gotten a 99 because you had to have basically all of Fulham to be able to score this high. But it really does shock me to see some of these scores and to think like there were some players that probably had 4 or 5 of these players in their side. That really would have made for like a massive differential movement week, right? Like the scores were so low this week. You could have picked up 50, 60 points at times on some of the top sides. How many of these players on screen did you have in your side?
0. Absolutely
0.
None. I mean, or I think Leno. No, not even Leno. I think you had Leno.
I had Leno as an auto sub. I actually deliberately benched him, and then he came in, luckily, with his 7 points to save my day.
You had, it's very rare that we talk about us having a 29-point week and having a very good week. But all things considered, that was a great week. Because this has to be, in my short memory of the last 4 or 5 years, one of the worst fantasy weeks that I've ever seen across the board as far as an average goes. Yes, there are weeks where you have a lot of the big hitters blank, but typically you can still scrounge out about 30 to 40 points on average you see. When the average is 16, it's not great.
No, you're in trouble when the average is 16. So we look here at the transfers in and out for this match week. Obviously, there's always a lot of movement when you have an international break. People have extra time. It's also, I think there's some folks who are using the wild card this period as well. So I think that lets you see a lot of movement as well. So Salah, Palmer, Muniz, Son, Gusto, surprises there? Shocked about any of that? What jumps out at you at the transfers in?
I think the only one that really jumps out at me is Gusto, because I think there are better options defensively across the board. Even if you're not spending that much, I think there are better directions to go. So with Salah, Palmer, Son, that all makes sense. Moon is one of those like a nice differentials, and it might be like you have a Holland and you can't spend more on a forward, so Moon is a nice differential there for you. So those four I'm completely fine with. The Gusto one's a little interesting. I won't lie. I think maybe part of it is anyone who's getting off of Alfie Doughty maybe going over to Gusto, knowing that he's going to play 90. That might be it. But yeah, I can't think of any other reason that I'd want on Gusto unless, it's not like Chelsea became a defensive powerhouse overnight all of a sudden. They still have their problems, and Gusto can get up the field, but it's not like he's banging in offensive returns to make me think I'd want to put much money into him.
Yeah, I think it's the combination of playing Burnley this weekend, his price tag of 4.2, pretty much a nailed-on starter in Pochettino's system as a wingback. And I think the other big is you have 2 guaranteed doubles for Chelsea, and they have strong fixtures overall. So, I mean, that right there, Chelsea has 12 matches left, guaranteed. That's a big return if you're planning to kind of hang with the player. And I think there are going to be a lot of players that are doing those types of things. So that'll be interesting to see.
That goes back to our discussion a few weeks ago, though, is of the amount of games versus the quality of the games. Yeah, I understand that some of the, like playing Burnley it's an easier opponent. They can get more points, but just because they have more games doesn't necessarily mean they're a better pick in the game, because Chelsea themselves, I mean, if they were top 6, yeah, I mean, all over that, but they've been hot and cold all year. So I guess that's the only thing I'm coming from, is that it's not as solid just because there's more games. It doesn't fit the same way for me.
Well, I know. I'm just more looking at Burnley, United, Sheffield, Everton. Then they play the double against Arsenal and Villa, which are difficult, sort of, except for Villa's kind of fallen off. West Ham, Forest, Bournemouth, Tottenham, Brighton. I mean, those are manageable games, and they are scoring goals. Like, we can all kind of crack on Chelsea all we want, but they play competitive in almost every match that they play in. And as long as he's playing, he does create. His actual XG is higher than Alexander-Arnold's this year, and his assist ratios are better than anyone in the time that he plays per minute played. So, like, I think he actually does create. And as they're starting to score some goals and, Jackson's rounding into a little form, I think Gusto is actually a smart pick. But I think you have to you pick him because you don't feel bad about a guy sitting on your bench who could score as a defender and give you some form of attacking returns. I mean, the amount of clean sheets that have occurred this season are so few and far between. You're ultimately only looking at defenders that can either score goals or create assists.
Sure.
So, I think that really changes it. And I think that's what makes it. And I think it's also an enabler pick, because it allows you to make and move money around to either figure in ways to bring Salah in or try to get Holland back in for those who got away from him. Speaking on the outgoings, we have De Bruyne, Bowen, Doughty, Morris, and Tony. What are your thoughts on the outgoings? Surprises? Any of them that you would have kept if they were in your side?
I think Bowen potentially would be the only name that I would consider. I think De Bruyne doesn't make sense with the money plus having Mo come back. Luton's doubles are over. And Tony, I mean, there is just a lot of good forwards, and Brentford right now seem to be struggling a lot more than we had expected them with Tony coming back. So I think all in all, it makes a ton of sense. And the only one, I would like your take on this as well. I think Bowen is a decent differential pick based on what I've seen, kind of the template going towards. But I wonder if you also feel the same way, if that's someone that you might be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I like Bowen. I always like Bowen. You know that. I understand the Luton outs as well. I think when it comes to West Ham, you just never know. And as long as they're still active in Europe, I do worry that at some point they, start to focus on the Europa League a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how they do as they progress in that competition into the next round. So I think the De Bruyne one doesn't really shock me, though. I think this would have been a week if you aren't on a wild card and you had De Bruyne, unless he's just your easy road to Mo. I think it almost was a week where De Bruyne could have been like kind of a sneaky differential play, because so many players are selling him. And I do think that City is going to attack Arsenal as their best form of defense, especially with all their defensive issues and the injuries they picked up. People forget it is at the Etihad, like it is at City. Everyone talks like Arsenal's at home and just going to be able to roll them. I know that they rolled Sheffield United and Burnley and a bunch of other Scribinis, but this is the European champions. Like, it really irritates me when people talk like, oh yeah, Arsenal's just going to run with this, or if, they should walk this. It just kind of drives me nuts. I think that City will put on an offensive performance on Sunday. I don't know if they'll win the match. Hopefully it's a scored draw, but it'll be interesting to see. I don't like Tony either. I haven't really liked what I've seen from him since he's been back. Doughty and Morris makes sense. Bowen, the only thing I can think there is it's just people looking at the fixtures and thinking he's blanked a few weeks and they don't really want to overinvest in that at this time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is a graphic that you found this week. So talk to me about checkthechance.com's goal scoring metrics, how they come up with it, and what did it do to impact your decisions for this match week?
The calculation, I think, is at the bottom there based on odds from the bookies and blah, blah, blah. The interesting thing to me was Son being at the highest over the likes of Haaland and Salah. I get the matchup favors Son as opposed to Haaland. But then when you look down a bit, they also have Richarlison, Werner, and Maddison all in the top 9 of scoring chance. And so to me, it kind of made me sit back and think, if I have enough Spurs assets in my team for the upcoming next 4, 5, 6 weeks, because spoiler alert, I am on a wild card this week. I chose to activate it today. So I am in the midst of kind of building this team out. I pretty much have it done. There's just 2 spots left and I'm really toying back and forth. But yeah, I think it was just really interesting to see the amount of Spurs names so high up and then having Haaland just sit at second behind Son.
Now, this is talking about this match week, though. So, like, when you look at this, like, if you're on a wild card and you ask yourself, well, do I have enough Spurs assets? You have that issue is, in 3 weeks' time, Spurs don't play. So you get to double match week 34. If you have 2 or 3 Spurs assets in your wild card team this week, you're going to probably have to use at least 1 free transfer in the next 3 weeks to move off a Spurs player, or risk not having a full starting 11. If you come in now hot with 2, 3 Spurs players, like a lot of folks would, because they have some good fixtures, and then they have the double coming behind it. It really comes down to, remind me, you still have your free hit, correct?
No, I used it.
Oh, so you used your free hit, so you don't have the ability to free hit.
No.
I could see if you had your free hit going with multiple Spurs, then you could free hit in 34 and have your Spurs and Chelsea assets for their double in 35. Because most likely Chelsea and Spurs will have at some point a back-to-back period where they're doubling and back-to-back match weeks, which is, it's kind of a spicy proposition as long as there's goals in all the games. But if you're a Palmer owner, if you're a Son owner, I really think that Richarlison, if I were going with a Spurs asset other than Son, I think Richarlison is probably the best one. I expect him to start this weekend through the middle. And when he's played through the middle this year, he's scored goals and Son's not. So I almost feel like it's a little bit of a dicey proposition. And I think if you're bringing Son into your team this week, especially against Sheffield, you're probably captaining him as well. And I just feel like it's a high gamble. Interesting to see Muniz so high up the list. It doesn't surprise me with his form and the fact that they are playing such a weak opponent in Sheffield United. But it is still a little shocking that you see his name ahead of some of the other strikers spread across the Premier League, including everyone on Arsenal. Anyone on here that you're absolutely targeting for your wild card?
I could say I've got Son, I've got Salah, I've got Darwin, I've got Watkins. I think that's about it from there. And I think, because I was looking at the fixtures too, but the thing with the blank in a few weeks is the wild card itself is going to be built so that there is a playable team there. And if I need to make one single transfer during that week, then that'll be just fine, I think. So I don't know if having 3 Spurs assets starting this week is going to be that painful if you're looking forward, because you can move off of one of them and still have a decent team as long as you're not, having non-starting bench fodder on your side. Then you should be okay with some rotation. Hopefully. I mean, that's the goal, right?
Right. You're also doing that in a double match week that's on a wraparound of European fixtures. So teams might be rotating. You're probably going to want, Liverpool assets. There could be rotation there. You probably are going to want most likely you'd have some Wolves assets even in, because they have a really good double fixtures. Like it's an interesting kind of a double match week there in 34 because there's so many fixtures, though they don't jump out. When are you planning to? Are you just plan to roll your bench boost all the way to 37?
Yeah, because then I feel like if I get essentially 6 weeks of movement from now until then to really piece together exactly who I need on the bench at that moment, without taking any hits, hopefully. But that's always been the goal, is hitting the bench boosts then. But there's a small possibility, because I still have the triple captain left to use. There is a chance that I would rather do that in 37, which kind of leaves me with an earlier bench boost. So that's the only thing that's sort of putting a kink in the work right now, is that it's just those two together. It's tough to decide which way I want to go first.
So you would rather use your triple captain in 37 on like Foden than you would use it on Mo in 34?
Potentially.
Against Everton and
look, we don't know if Mo's going to be healthy in 34. I mean, that's
we don't know. I don't know. He's right now. If you use the triple captain and it isn't on Mo Salah in match week 34, it will be the second dumbest thing you've done all year, outside of not bringing Haaland into your team.
Not having Haaland hasn't done anything for me, though. It hasn't been a positive or a
dropped
negative.
250,000 spots in the last 5 weeks.
That wasn't because of Haaland, I can tell you that.
No, but the times in which you would, if you had played the game as you started the game, if you had Haaland in your side from December forward and played the exact same game you played, you'd be further up the table right now than you are right now. And with 10 match weeks to go, I think you'd have to go back and look at your numbers. You're talking about the 4th highest scored player. Like, I think you have a few. We'll talk about your wild card and look at the teams. I think keeping Watkins right now is arguably the worst play any fantasy manager's doing. He's actually blanked. He's not on penalties. He has poor fixtures, some of the toughest fixtures of all teams on the run-in. His team's not really in form. He doesn't take free kicks or penalties. I should come back to. So ultimately, you have to get others to create the goals for him. And with the amount of fixtures that they have still to play, playing less fixtures than all the other big key strikers, like I just genuinely think, and he's really expensive. At the beginning of the season, when he was 8 million, it made a lot of sense. Now at 9+, it's actually I think that Watkins ends up being almost like risky business, because if he doesn't get you the goods, I think it's really like, it's almost like when people would have Jamie Vardy the last few years of Leicester being in the Premier League. And he just offers so little else. And I think while the rest of the side is struggling, and they are a struggling side at this point, Aston Villa, I think Watkins is the only one that you had mentioned that's a question mark. My fear with Darwin is we love him as a Liverpool supporter and we see the upside, but so often he plays 70 minutes and gets a yellow card and, doesn't offer the points. You don't have any fear that investing in Darwin there takes you off of maybe more sure-firing strikers like Solanke or...
There's always fear, but part of the game is playing in a way to just enjoy it and have fun. And I feel like having Darwin and Watkins brings me more joy than doing Holland and Solanke. That's part of it for me.
Yeah, I don't understand what the joy is, except for you don't like rooting for City to score goals. I get that part, but I like, what's the joy of Aston Villa winning games or scoring goals? Like, I don't know. I for me personally, like, I don't have a rooting interest in these players outside of watching the fantasy. I mean, obviously, I want every outcome to focus and feature on Liverpool doing better in the standings. That is my, end result. And I'll always say, like, Holland will sit on my team, but if he blanks, I'm very happy because it usually means that City didn't win. But I look at it like I didn't bring in Liverpool players for the November and December because they were poor and they weren't really doing anything from a fantasy aspect. Like, I do know what you mean. It's fun to have the players that you like to root for. I just don't know where when some of the underlying numbers don't line up.
Well, sure.
I think sometimes that's the hard part. So let's take a look at another graphic you found talking about the best forwards for this match week. It's a good graphic here. Shows, goals and assists by players, the XG, X assist, XGI, and then, of course, per 90, and then whether or not there's a double game weeks, where those double game weeks will happen, etc. You've already said you're going to have Watkins and Darwin. In yours, would you consider the crazy triple captain on Darwin for the differential in game week 34?
Probably not. I mean, I can be silly, but I don't think I'd be that silly. And I know I was really close to giving Solanke the triple captain this past week, and thankfully that didn't end up happening because that would have been a very rough triple captain. So no, I can't see myself doing that. It would have to be, as long as he's healthy, Mo is the only option for a triple captain off the Liverpool team in 34.
And if you were to go outside of the box on 37, do you have an idea of who you might target to triple captain with the fixtures and who they have in 37?
I mean, Isak is interesting always. I think you like Foden, like you mentioned, would be an interesting differential because Holland's going to have, if anyone's holding on to a triple captain, many people are probably holding onto it for Holland for 37 if they're not going to use it in 34. So I think a way to get around that would be going with a different City asset. Again, we have 7 game weeks left before we get there, so a lot of things can change. But I think those are the only 2 names that I would throw out there in the moment, really.
And would you go near any of Højlund, Jackson, or even Solanke? You seem like you're off Dom at this point. Højlund's been a big talk for a differential. United has, the extra fixture in 37, some decent fixtures along the way. There's no question that the kid has talent. You can see it when he plays. He's a big, strong lad. What are the thoughts there?
I think he's a fun differential to go with. It just kind of ends up being what your setup is like. Because if you're still on 3 forwards, then depending on how you want to spread the money throughout there, it's going to make more sense for your team, whether you go that direction or not. I think not having Holland, though, allows you the flexibility of going whatever you want to do. The problem with having Holland is it really limits your creativity up front, or at least, you're going to have to sacrifice something somewhere. So I think it really depends on if you have Holland and if you have Mo, because if you have both Holland and Mo, that really dampens your potential of doing anything else there.
So let's take a look at a similar graphic, but we'll look with regards to the defenders. How many of these defenders are sitting currently in your wild card team?
2. Just 2.
Gabriel and Udogie.
Close. This was a bit of an issue because I didn't want both, but Gabriel and Ben White currently, just because I wanted a Liverpool defender in there, but I have Keller and I can't have a 4th. So that's the only, I'm going back and forth there with whether I just have a different keeper and bring in Van Dijk is the one that I was considering, honestly. So that's where my head's at.
And you don't have any concerns going into this game week with them playing City and you having two Arsenal defenders?
All three of them are on the bench as it stands.
All three as in
Saka, White, and Gabriel. All three Arsenal assets. Because then I have Branthwaite, Lascelles, and Pedro Porro are the other three.
Wow, you think a Everton central defender who has one attacking return in his professional career is a smarter buy than a Chelsea fullback who plays on the right wing?
Yeah.
I love you, brother, but I don't understand. I don't understand the logic. And Bournemouth being one of the highest attacking rated sides in all the Premier League when it comes to like expected goals and volume. That's one there. Like it's those type. I understand Branthwaite and like the allure, but a central defender at 4-2 offers really little except for a perfect match clean sheet. And I just think that like this is a guy who's a center back in a relegation battle. It basically means you start the match with a yellow card. Every match. If you're doing your job, you get a yellow card every single match when you're 4 points off relegation and you're a central defender. I have some Everton defenders in my side as well, and we'll take a look at our teams. I just think like it feels like you might be building yourself up, right, for a side on a wild card that requires 3 or 4 transfers in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And I think that to me is always my biggest fear. I've done it. That's why I'm talking to you like I would like I want someone to talk to me. What is it about the Spurs assets and/or the Arsenal assets defensively that make you feel so comfortable and necessary to have them in your team this week?
So that I don't have to transfer them in a few weeks. I kind of take that off the desk, so to speak. So if I already know I'm going to want to be there in a few weeks, I'm not going to burn the idea of not having them right now and then having to force my way into a way to get them. I think that's where I'm at with that, because I can still, if I need to make 3 or 4 moves over the next 3 or 4 weeks, that's what I have the one transfer a week for. Like, I think, given where the setup is, I feel maybe overly, as you feel, overly confident with where I'm at right now. But yeah, I don't know. It feels right for whatever reason. And that's the best I'm going to give you. Unfortunately, there's no literal logic behind it besides it kind of feels right.
And you're playing Kelleher?
This week, yeah.
But in general, like you have Kelleher not as fodder to hold. Like you're taking up a Liverpool asset for, and again, a guy you're going to have to transfer out eventually or just make your backup keeper, because Alisson will be back in a few weeks and he will be the starter.
Right. So that is the one part where Kelleher moves to someone else. Van Dijk goes into defense and takes out Branthwaite, something like that. So that's the kind of one of the last pieces of the puzzle. And it might very well be that direction easily. It's just, this is sort of the template that I created for now to be able just to look overall. Yeah,
it makes sense. I mean, these are the things, like I have a hard time. Like we'll talk about it. I'm also on a wild card. I ripped the Band-Aid off. I would kind of wish I didn't. I had a plan, and then there were a couple injuries and a couple things didn't go my way here, and that really set me back, and I didn't really have a choice. My defense was in tatters, and I had both Odegaard and Saka, and I really didn't want to have both of them sitting on the bench against City or try to, roll the dice and figure out which way to go there. So I ended up ripping it as well. And I think my fear is like, I don't want to have to want to burn a transfer on a keeper. I don't want to burn a transfer.
Especially the last 8 weeks.
Yeah. And that really is making me like, I need 5 or 6 of these guys to roll. Now, I'm probably actually going to try to play the differential route and probably going to bench boost in 34. So I've used my wild card to ultimately set myself up, knowing how can I maximize points between 30 and 34 to the point where I pick up enough ground that hopefully I'm inside the top 75, 60,000 by the end of that. So I know that as long as I can kind of load up on some Spurs and Chelsea assets for their doubles, get enough players on the double in 37, I can maybe just hang with those who have the free hit. Because I really believe the people who have the wild card, I mean, there's some people with wild card, triple captain, and the free hit and bench boost. I mean, they are just positioned right now to basically just go at it. Because for me, I would have probably, if I had the free hit remaining, I think I would have free hit in 34, wild carded in 35 or 36, and then bench boosted in 37.
Right.
If I really would have been gutsy, I would have done what I did a couple years ago, and I would have saved my free hit for 38 and basically had a third wild card on the season. And 38 is always such a crapshoot because you never know what team's going to roll out 5 kids and youth players and what guy's going to go out there and score 6 so he can get within 1 of the golden boot or whatever crazy ass thing that can happen. So let's take a look at your team from last week, though I know it's nothing that you want to revisit. You took a hit.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
Took a hit. I mean, the only thing that you could have done worse was bring in Region or something. Like, it's probably the only thing worse you could have done with this side. So looking back on it now, anything you wish you had done, things you could have done different? What were the actual 2 transfers you made, to remind me, please?
You know what? I'm trying to remember because I blocked this week out of my mind already. So let me double check. I think what do I see here that I don't see? De Bruyne down to Bowen and Solanke to Tony. So yeah, wasn't great. That was not great. It happens.
Wrong.
I wasn't the only one that was burned. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess for that matter, a lot of players also did not have great weeks. So it is what it is.
Yeah, so you didn't drop that far, though you are down in the lower half of the 600,000. So, what is your goal right now at this point to get to by the end of the season?
I mean, probably top 500K would be a realistic thing to shoot for. Given no Holland, maybe to stay in the top 700,000 is more realistic. But if I do top 500, I think I'll be pretty happy. That will be my highest finish up until this point of my fantasy career. So I'll be happy with that.
And where were you at your high point this year? Remind the viewers.
So the next slide, actually, if we talk about that, I don't know, top 30,000. But it wasn't because of Holland. I will die on that hill. It wasn't because I didn't have Holland.
Do you think it helped you not having Holland? It did when you were scoring well, but do you think it helped you when you started to take a nosedive?
I'm gonna have to go back and really assess to see what happened there.
Otherwise known as, we have a hanging shad, folks. We're gonna have to recount these things a few times. Yeah, so this is a look at my team here. What a shit show. I did okay, obviously. Not going to complain about the 29 by any means. I did use my free hit, which was tough. I felt like I could have done a lot better. Obviously, I know I could have. I did at one point. I picked this team with clearly some differentials in mind between Douglas Luiz and Kudus. I went with the Spurs double up. That did not work. I was really mad at myself because I all week long said I was going to play Muniz all week long, and I didn't. And I also had the armband on Fofana with about 15 minutes to go before the deadline, and I chickened out of fear that Son would haul against Fulham and I would take the tumble, even though I picked the right players. Clearly, I got very lucky with Leno. Company deciding to sit maybe the best player at the entire club on a random ass game was great for me. But don't really love the team, but can't complain about moving up, making a 25% increase, getting up almost inside the top 150,000, which is great. But it only led me to rip the wild card. And I did pull a slide together for where my wild card team is right now. It will not stay like this because I already know of 2 or 3 changes I'm going to make. I loved giving you shit about Branthwaite, knowing he was in my team, waiting to show you later. He is a player that I am considering taking out. You can tell I'm on Virgil as well. I'll probably go a different keeper, purely because Johnson is there's talk that he'll be out.
He's out for the rest of the year. Confirmed.
Oh, he is. Okay, so
that got
confirmed
Euros too.
So obviously I'll pick up a new keeper there. There's part of me that it's frustrating. I could go right back to Leno. I think he has a great fixture this week, but he doesn't have the doubles. If I'm going to have keepers, I might as well have 2 keepers who have doubles in 34, especially if I'm planning to play the bench boost. I love this team because I feel like I've set it up to both get points in the immediate future with guys who are set to score with good fixtures in both 30 and 31. And I know most people would look at this and be like, but I don't see any Arsenal defenders. And originally I had Gabriel, but then I was like, why am I holding Gabriel on the side this week when he's going to sit on the bench? I don't love him. There's a couple other of the games, so I'll make sure I get him in. Like, one of my transfers will probably be Pedro Porro to Gabriel, which saves me some money and gets him in before the double game week. I will probably drop, if I don't get rid of Foden first, like there's part of me that's almost thinking about moving Foden to Richarlison, taking the extra money and either reinvesting it off of Sarabia. I do have some money in the bank, but I'm trying to leave that there. The other part is like, I really like, when you look at Arsenal's fixtures, they really do have some great matchups defensively. And I think Raya just, it makes sense to have a keeper is going to play. And it's a singular way into that Arsenal defense.
Yeah.
It really depends for me of whether or not I want to get Odegaard back in. I also thought about getting off of Saka. I've kind of been like depressed having a Saka as an asset all year long. Outside of the fact that he's on penalties and occasionally corners, he's just he glitters and glows and then he just dips and falls off. So, I still have some tweaking to do here. I do like the side. I think it puts me in a good position, and I think it makes the side very balanced for movement. Like there are interchangeable pieces for me, and I really love the Wolves matchup in the double game week, which is why I like having. And I think Sarabia might be the best player in the game under 5 million right now. Like, I think he's a better shout than Garnacho, as much as I think Garnacho is a much greater talent. Once Pedro Neto went down, someone has to be the creative force. And when Neto was missing earlier, it was Sarabia. So this is how I'm going to roll with it. I did think about going without Haaland and keeping Son in the side, using some deeper mids, but I just feel like, Haaland hasn't had a great year, but he's still had a massive year.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe, as much as it pains me to say it, that City is about to go on one of their runs where they get 9 wins and a draw. And I just have this feeling that if that's going to happen, he's probably going to play a large part of the goal scoring. But it is interesting because when you look at Liverpool's fixtures, Salah is almost a guaranteed captain like 5 of the next 6 match weeks. And having a $14 million player that's not a captain option is a difficult pill to swallow. But I think in prior years, it would make more sense if there were 4 defenders over 6 million that you wanted to have in your side. And I just don't feel like any of them are doing anything right now. I went with Virgil because I really do believe, I think you were mentioning it earlier, I think Liverpool has good matchups. And I think Virgil has put himself back into the situation where he is a threat to score from any set piece that Liverpool get. They get a lot of them. And I just think as captain, he is going to most likely always have that overall prowess. So let's take a quick look at your wild card as it stands. Talk us through what you're thinking here. Well, you already said all 3 of your Arsenal assets are on the bench this week, and you would be playing Kelleher.
Yes. Well, now there's 2 Arsenal assets because I forgot about Aït-Nouri. And I told myself, I think it was last week, that I wanted Aït-Nouri for the rest of the year. And so I made the quick tactical switch when
when you saw him in my side.
Well played. Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I'm at right now. And you mentioned Saka. I haven't really had Saka all year, so I imagine this is going to be the time where he starts getting a lot of points because he's in my, not this week, but after this week, he's gonna get some points. I'm still in flux with the whole Bailey and Watkins deal. I know you talked about that a little bit. And again, with the Kelleher or Van Dijk shout, because obviously Ali's going to come back. So Van Dijk has the better opportunity to stay in actual playing form over the next 10 weeks as opposed to Quavine. So I think that's the only thing I would consider. I do like everything else. I like the cheapness of Lascelles. I think Aït-Nouri is a really good buy at that amount. I think Sarabia is a good shout too. Obviously, if it's not Bailey, it could be Sarabia. I do have 6.1 million in the bank, so that does leave a lot of room for flexibility. So I might even bring Muniz up to someone as well. So I don't know. This is kind of where we're at right now. And then being benched would probably be Gabriel, Saka, and then most likely Leon Bailey, I think is where I would be sitting.
Yeah, I like a lot of it, man. I gotta be honest. I do like Lascelles. I like that shout. I thought about bringing him in. I struggle with Newcastle because they too haven't kept many clean sheets.
Sure.
I mentioned it on, I think it was the Premier League show with Bickler that we recorded earlier last week or this week. It was last week. That I just felt like probably like maybe the most underappreciated or biggest injury that no one talked about all year long, totally like derailing a season, was probably Newcastle losing Nick Pope. People don't realize, like, everyone talked about how great that defense was last year and how good they were together, but I don't think that people ever actually like credited the fact that it was actually Pope in the back that was part of what made them such a really good side. So as we get out of here on this, before we tell everyone to go do all the likes, subscribes, and all that crazy, crazy stuff, do you have any regret for hitting your wild card?
No, my team was not in good shape. So what you saw last week, that's what I had. I couldn't go anywhere with that. I needed to make at least 6 moves to get anywhere doable for the foreseeable future. So no regret. But I sense a little bit of regret possibly on your end.
Yeah, I kind of wish I hadn't done it. I was playing around with it. I had moves. I had a plan. I was able to get to Mo without doing anything. And then it was more along the lines of like, did I want Pascal Gross in the side? Did I want Morris and Doughty still in the side? Like, how do I get these guys out and get others in? So then I started thinking about a multiple move, and that's what happened. So I ended up making 3 transfers, and I was going to take a -8. And you know how I feel about hits. But I genuinely kind of convinced myself that it was a really, really, positive scoring move. And it was. I mean, I got Mo, Palmer. I think it was Mo, Palmer, for Neto, De Bruyne, and then Or no, I think actually, I'm sorry. It was Mo, Palmer, and Virgil, I think, coming in. And going out was like Gabriel, who was going to, or Saliba, who was going to sit on the bench, Neto, and maybe it was Pascal Gross or Odegaard. I was keeping De Bruyne and Mo this week on my side. And then next week, I was going to make a double move, take the -4 to get Morris to Holland by dropping De Bruyne to someone else. So I like had a 2-week period, but I was taking a -12 to almost get to a team. And then I just started playing around and I was at like -40, but I had already done I did the 3 moves. Like I was at -8. And then like 2 days later, I was like thinking about it and I was like, wait, and if I did this next week and I do this next week, and I was like, well, what if I just do it all now and I hit the wild card and I pick my 8 points back up off the floor?
Yeah.
So I almost like pushed myself into it. I kind of wish I didn't because I really did have plans, but there were just a couple players and then some flags that led me to think that I'd fall behind. So, you know, every year I make one of the chips that is absolutely like a blinding, brilliant move, like randomly picking triple captain last year when nobody else was on Rashford and he got 20 plus points. Like every once in a while I find those once a year, and every once in a while, you know, I triple captain Sadio Mane on a triple game week and he gets hurt a minute and a half into the first match.
Thankfully he's in Saudi Arabia now, so he can't hurt you anymore, I promise.
It still hurts me. I finished just outside the top 10,000 and got 3 on a triple captain on a triple game week.
What could have been.
Yes. What also could be is you going right to your keyboard right now and finding our page, finding our channel on YouTube and subscribing to the channel. You'll get all kinds of great content, updates, and notifications on programs like our Monday, Wednesday, and Friday Reckless Coffee mornings with Timuchin and Friends, as I like to call it, our Thursday night podcast, our Monday night podcast, the Fantasy Show, the Premier League Show, our Redditorials, our shorts, our clips, all the good stuff. Don't forget to check out the Patreon site if you haven't already. Subscribe for free for the time being. Get some free content. Or you can, as Timuchin likes to say, jump on the Gordo Cheapskate subscription plan for just $1 a month. $1, people. We can all afford $1. If we can't, you probably don't have internet and you aren't watching this right now. But last comments, Fantasy Guru. Do you expect a green arrow this week?
I'm going to say no, so that I can be pleasantly surprised rather than bitterly disappointed.
Awesome. All right, for everyone at American Scouser, thank you all for watching this. We appreciate all of the likes, comments, subscriptions, and your support. Have a great week. We'll be back next Thursday to figure out whether or not my co-host is pleasantly surprised or utterly disappointed. Have a great week, everyone. See you soon.